So now we have the next presentation, and I'm really delighted to introduce Professor Emad El Omar. So Emad is the editor of one of the leading journals in my field. I'm a gastroenterologist. My field of gastroenterology, the journal Gut, which is neck and neck with the other leading journal in the field, which is gastroenterology. And we have both the editors of these journals here with us today, so it's really fantastic. Emad is Professor of Medicine at the University of New South Wales at St George Hospital. He's Director of the Microbiome Research Centre. He's an absolute expert in microbiome-related research. And it's really a terrific pleasure to have the Editor-in-Chief of Gut here to talk about how to publish your work in a high-impact journal. And I hope people will take notes. Thank you, Emad.
So thank you very much, Nick, for this very nice introduction, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to have my first APAMI conference, and it's very high quality, and I feel really, really humbled by the expertise that is available in this audience. And I hope my talk is actually very, very simple. It's very simple, obvious kind of facts about how you publish high-quality research. That high-impact journal is just a marker of the high-quality research that deserves to be published in a prominent journal. So I think, I'll go through a kind of a higher look at this. High-impact publications don't appear out of nothing. There's a very, very long, protracted process that requires to be done to achieve that distinction. Let's just go here. How do you advance the with the mouse? This one? Yes. Yeah, thanks. So I'm the editor of Gut, as Nick introduced, and talking about cover images. This is one of the things I'm really most proud of, because instead of putting some gory details with, in gastroenterology, bleeding ulcers and other things, I actually thought we'd put something very, very nice and beautiful. And it's actually a reward to the authors, because each issue, the thing that takes me the longest is to actually decide on the editor's choice and then find a beautiful image from their city or their country as a reward, and that becomes actually the cover image of Gut. So I've had the privilege of selecting quite a large number of really, really beautiful images with outstanding papers. I've been editor for 15 years, so that gives me a kind of a very long-term perspective. Now, how does it start? Well, I think the most fundamental take-home message here for all of the young researchers is to have mentorship. Whether this is as a medical student, as a science student, as anything at all, you need to have mentorship, because that will actually guide you through your career. And I've been very fortunate in having some outstanding mentors from left to right there. Professor Kenneth McCall, who's my dear friend and mentor. He started with me when I was a second-year medical student and still is my mentor. Next is Professor Roddy McSween. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was a giant in pathology, liver pathology, and the editor of Muir's Textbook of Pathology. He taught me so many things. And then the two gentlemen on the right-hand side there is Marty Blazer, who's a giant in the microbiome field and microbiology, and Dr. Joseph Raumini, who's the director of the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics of the Leaf-Raumini syndrome fame. I think some of you might recognize this. But all of these people, I was very, very fortunate that they actually started me on my career, that taught me the basic principles of good research. And ultimately, that's the kind of the fundamental aspect of high-impact publications. Now, the other thing is to have a passion. If you want to produce high-quality research, you have to be motivated by something. And for me personally, as a gastroenterologist, it's these horrible images there. These are, cancers and inflammatory bowel disease and things that, when you diagnose it in patients, you feel a duty to actually engage in research to try and find answers to alleviate the suffering. That's what drives us. This is actually the motivation. And if that's your motivation in life, is to make other people's lives better, then I think you will pursue a high-quality research career that will ensure that you produce work that is going to make a difference. And ultimately, that's what deserves to be published in high-impact journals. This is just the local here, because our champion here in Australia is the gentleman in the middle. And you'll notice that on his tie, there are some Helicobacters. This is Barry Marshall, discovered Helicobacter with Robin Warren. And sadly, Robin Warren passed away recently. We pay tribute to him. But this is just a group of people that all contributed to high-impact publications. Paul Maedi here, one of his mentors is Tony Axon in Leeds in the UK, and he was obviously one of the giants of the H. pylori field. Behind him is Ernst Kuipers. Again, he was one of us, as it were, one of our kind of compatriots, who was health minister in the Netherlands until very recently, and John Atherton behind me, and that's me with a little bit more hair, and you know, that's when I started to dye my hair white after this. Actually, it's just a... Anyway, scientific publishing, the first kind of aspect of this is that it's a duty. Actually, as a researcher, you have a duty to yourself, to your career, self-esteem, ambition, and legacy. Obviously to your colleagues and the staff that work with you, the students and your collaborators, your institution, which judges you actually by the output that you produce, the funders, of course, and this could be government funding or charities and philanthropy. These are the people that go out shaking cans in the high street, collecting money so that you can do research. So you have a duty to actually bring something out of that exercise. But most importantly, to your patients. This is what motivates us, and it's our duty to actually make progress, deliver something that is going to make their lives better. And of course, there's the higher thing about science and medicine and knowledge generally, which is a kind of altruistic contribution. Now, we used to say publish or perish, but this is actually the wrong approach, because it's all about, really, it's more about quality and not quantity. One decent paper that makes a difference to healthcare is worth 10 poorer ones that basically are just, simple publications. Now, this is the letter we sent to accepted papers. I'm always very proud when I press that button to accept someone's paper. And it's a cheerful message. It just, it congratulates the author. And we are genuinely, it's great pleasure for us to send that on papers that are obviously of very high quality and excellence. So how do we get there? How do you get that kind of happy letter? Well, how do you get from zero to hero? And the process really has to start. This is actually a concept that I learned from Bill Summerscale, who used to work for The Lancet. He was an excellent senior editor, actually. And in his talks about publishing, he said journals, such as The Lancet and the high-impact kind of journals, want the first story. So that's the first publication, just as you see here as kind of the foundation stone of a large building. And they want the last word. So if there's been a lot of controversy about a particular topic, they want that definitive study that sets the record right, and people then will follow that kind of, that story is kind of completed, as it were. So that's the type of paper that will end up in, the high-impact journals. Ultimately, you want sound research with conclusions that will stand the careful scrutiny and are reproducible. So they have to have inherent properties that allow other people to test that and challenge that. Of course, you want some significant advances that will stimulate further research and discussion, and essentially something that the research will talk about. You all have journal clubs, I'm sure, at your institutions. Those papers that get selected are the ones that people will want to talk about. And of course, it has to have an impact on clinical practice in the foreseeable future. Now, this is an example of those papers. This is a famous paper from 1984 that was published in The Lancet. This was, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren having a very simple study, just a descriptive study that just highlighted these curved bacilli that they saw in sections and biopsies from patients with ulcers. And essentially, that was the birth of the Helicobacter pylori story. Now, I know for a fact that this paper struggled. All the 3 reviewers, external peer reviewers, actually rejected it because they thought this is just a load of rubbish. But to his credit, the editor of The Lancet saw something in that one and actually decided to publish it. And we're very grateful for that, because it actually initiated a huge amount of research, actually trying to shoot that story down, and test it and call its bluff. And it failed, because it was actually genuine, and it led to the discovery of the cause of ulcers and simple eradication that then cures that disease. So that's kind of real progress. And this work would not have been funded by any of our research funding bodies. This is something that actually, that's real progress that came fortuitously. So that's, this actually, we celebrated 40 years of that publication this year. Now, ultimately, as I said, it's all about inspiring the next generation and starting early. So if you are going to be publishing high-impact journals, in high-impact journals, you've got to start early. You've got to nurture that scientific curiosity and enthusiasm. And this is our duty as mentors and as our leaders of our teams. Provide research opportunities that people can undertake, mentorship and apprenticeship to train people, and always try and improve yourself by lifelong learning. These are the kind of the simple fundamentals that we should all employ in our teams and our units. So basically, the attributes that are needed to succeed in producing that work: curiosity, ambition, enthusiasm and passion, resilience and hard work. You'll get knocked down so many times in your career, so you've got to be very, very resilient and thick-skinned. Discipline, belief in yourself, and humility. This is curiosity. It starts from very early. This is one of my children, so I'm just, this is many years ago, by the way. He's now a medical student. So, but his curiosity started very early, and I think this is something that we nurture. We try and encourage him to be original and kind of innovative in their thinking, and to actually challenge dogma. Instead of accepting it and just following it, challenge it, and that's really quite a fundamental model. Ambition, of course, I think that is important. Not ambition to publish in high-impact journals or to become a professor or whatever it is. It's actually ambition to make a difference, to serve people, to make people's lives better. I think that is the greater ambition that we should all be aspiring for. And of course, enthusiasm, and I love this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm." That's so absolutely true. And of course, hard work and resilience. You're not going to do it without, by just kind of being complacent. You've really got to be working hard, but targeted. You cannot plow a field in your mind. You've got to work hard and do the work. This is another one of my favorite quotes. This is from Gary Player, who's a famous, obviously, golfer, who'd basically, one of his shots was a hole-in-one. So somebody behind him said, "Oh, lucky, you're just lucky. You just got a hole-in-one." Yeah, he said, "The harder I practice, the luckier I get." And that's absolutely true. You actually create your own luck. And if you work hard, at some point, you will get lucky, and you deserve that luck. And self-discipline. I think this is the other thing that we all suffer from. And a lot of you in the audience absolutely suffer from that. We take on so much, but you've got to be a very consummate kind of organizer and taking care of your time and effort, and actually having a good balance between your work and your life and other things, so that you're not consumed by it, and actually you've got to be incredibly good discipline. And self-belief, because if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will, fundamentally. And most importantly, humility. I think that's very important. The more, the higher you rise in your research career, you've got to be much more humble, and particularly towards your students, your junior staff, the people that actually look up to you. I think this is an incredibly nice Chinese proverb there: "Be like the bamboo. The higher you grow, the deeper you bow." I think I like that principle very much. Anyway, so what kind of opportunities should our researchers seek? Well, the most important thing that we can teach them is reading, actually reading material that is produced, because from that you can learn how these excellent, superb investigators, the people that publish in the top journals all the time, write, and how they think, how they constructed and designed those studies, that logical flow that will be the template for your study when you're designing it. I think this is a very simple, cheap, starting kind of point where just read papers all the time. Finish what you start, publish your work, attending scientific meetings. I think this is, again, another opportunity. And presenting at scientific meetings, interacting with your peers and with your seniors, asking questions. All of these things will enrich your kind of horizons and background. The other very important, actually, thing that you can seek is reviewing for journals, because that is so highly educational. And if you do a good job, that's how you start climbing up the ladder. If you do well, good reviews, highly rated reviews, you'll be invited to be on the editorial boards, and eventually you can become an associate editor and then become an editor. That's the kind of the pathway for most people. So all of these things are actually, good pointers for that next generation. And ultimately, you want to collaborate and see kind of these exchanges between researchers. I think these are all good. So in terms of research, like the quality of research that is going to, lead to high impact publications, there's fundamentals of good research, which we have to obviously look for, ensure that it's there. Research funding, and we've already mentioned that. And of course, the fundamentals of communication, how you communicate your work by writing, these high quality papers. So you've got to maximize that quality and the impact of your research. Mentorship is important because they will guide you through it. Being aware of the literature, and there's absolutely no excuse nowadays for not being on top of the literature because it's at your fingertips. these little devices that you're holding in your hand, you can get all the information that you want just with simple little clicks. So in my generation and next generation used to go to the library, open these Index Medicus, and then try and find all of these stupid things and decaying kind of big books. No longer. You can actually just ask little questions and it'll get you all of the literature search that you want. So there's no reason whatsoever to reinvent the wheel. You've got to actually be aware of what's going on, and that is the basis for your designing your study. And of course, you want to ask an important research question, and essentially you want to design an excellent study. So the design of the study is the most important aspect of anything, because if it's not well designed, it's going to be rejected. That's the first thing that we look for. Is the design sound? Is it capable of answering that research question? And this obviously brings in the biostatistics into it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that one, and also the value of collaboration, because none of us individually can do high quality work. Very rare, unless you're funded by Bill Gates directly, you'll not be able to actually answer those. You have to collaborate. You have to pool your resources so they can produce those papers that appear in the top journals. So don't reinvent the wheel. Now, in terms of formulating research questions, this is actually simple advice, but honestly, this is probably the best take-home message, because we can waste a lot of energy and time if you're really planning to be an active researcher, if you don't particularly, pursue that approach from a very early stage in your career. Now, the important thing is that it's got to be an active area of research. In other words, there's an interest in that area of research. And then if you get engaged in that one, there's more opportunities, obviously, for funding. There's more opportunities for collaboration, more opportunities for publication. If you choose something that is very, very narrow, yes, it requires to be investigated. But if you're setting out on a new career, I think it's much easier to be successful if the area itself is actually of interest to a larger group of people. That's because they'll be able to review your work, they'll be able to advise you, they'll be able to kind of modify it and collectively enhance the quality of it. So again, that kind of the concept of collaboration. The study design, as I said, this is incredibly important in terms of the quality of the work that you do. All of the attributes that you're very familiar with, the approach to research has a hierarchical kind of structure. Obviously starts with observations, and observational studies are important, but they're observations. They have to kind of progress to the next stage of providing mechanisms or explanations for those observations, and that increases the quality and the worthiness of that work in terms of moving up the ranks of publications. And ultimately, when you get all of that information and you're ready to actually test out that new therapeutic approach, a drug or an intervention of some kind, and you have your double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, that's at the end of that process. But it starts with an observation that then progresses through mechanistic work and so forth. And if you want to increase the quality of the work and the higher impact, if you like, of the journals, it's going to be the full story. It's going to be an observation with mechanisms, with intervention of some kind that can reverse it or stop it. And then finally, this would be the kind of preamble for a clinical trial in due course. When you're involving your statisticians, involve them at the beginning. Don't bring them in at the end to kind of do the statistics for you. They have to be part of your team designing the study. So you've got to define your primary endpoints, you do your power calculations. If you can't achieve that number, you have to collaborate, just pool your resources, or do a pilot study, for example, to allow you to calculate that kind of the required power. But again, collaboration is the answer to that one. So calling a statistician at the end, as we say, is like calling a pathologist to do a post-mortem. They will tell you what your patient died of, but it's too late. It's not gonna work. Now, research funding, and this is a very sore point for all of us, because we're all researchers, we all have great ideas, and we want to answer questions. But essentially, across the whole globe, I would reckon, the research funding is fundamentally flawed, because it never gives you enough to provide definitive answers in the quickest way possible. And obviously, there are explanations for this, because they may not be the resources to do that. But I think if they just focus on, at least solving some problems definitively, we will all collectively across the globe benefit from that one. And in fact, we had that during the pandemic, when our obsession was to find a COVID vaccine. We got it in 9 months. Why? Because everybody was working together. All the resources were pooled together. So it is feasible, it is possible, why can't we do it for cancer? Why can't we do it for inflammatory bowel disease if we can all work together and fund it to achieve that? Now, as researchers, of course, we're trying to produce that high-quality work. You've got to play the game, unfortunately. And to do that, you've got to learn all about funding, the funding landscape, try and get some grants to get you going. And we're all familiar with that difficulty in not having a track record because you haven't got any grants and then applying to get grants, and it becomes a bit of a catch-22 kind of situation. But we still have to play the game, and you have to understand the landscape of funding that is available to you and maximize your chances at getting through. You can start small and grow bigger. So these little funds that sometimes are for pilot studies or startup grants, seed funding is very useful because it allows you to get some data and kind of move up the ladder. But again, collaboration. If you can't do it by yourself, for God's sake, just network and work together so that you can actually deliver progress. I think that's the answer. This is a very nice paper, actually, that was Secrets to Writing a Winning Grant. This was published a few years ago in Nature. I think for someone looking for kind of a nice template for that, it's actually an excellent publication. Now, we just move finally to communication, scientific writing. And this is probably the thing that impedes most of the young investigators because they dread that kind of time when they have to write the paper, especially if you're targeting a very decent high-impact journal. But as Uncle Perry told us, it's all about stories. You're telling stories. All these stories is what we communicate from one generation to the next. And those stories that last are the ones that are told well. So they have to make sense. And it's exactly the same concept with writing a scientific paper. It's got to make sense. It's got to be something that is actually logical with a logical flaw so that you have a beginning, a middle, and an end with a take-home message. It's very simple, but it's incredibly difficult to bring about in practice. This is Alan Alda. Some of you might know him, and just highlighting that communication is something, not something that you add on to science. It's actually the essence of science. Is being a good communicator is the essence of science. And tell them your story. That's it. You've got kids, and you tell them nighttime stories. They have to make sense. They can't be kind of illogical things. And certainly, those who tell the stories rule the world. In a good way or in a bad way. If you can tell a story that actually people can follow, it can actually influence people. Now, scientific writing, this is the sense that you get when you're sitting down, especially writing your discussion, which is everybody dread kind of part of the paper. But trust me, once it's completed, that sense of elation where it's addictive. Actually I can do this. I can, and it becomes actually really kind of a very positive experience. But you've got to through that pain. Get through that pain in one piece. And the best way to become a good communicator, again, is to read. You've got something that's available, it's cheap, it's free. Just read those things and use them as your templates to construct your own story. Because that template that has made it into those top publications is freely available and something that we can adapt easily. Now, again, there's no excuse for not this time, this age, this kind of era, for not, making the effort to do it because it's available. And most of the time it's free of charge. There are obviously scientific writing courses and workshops, but these tend to be a little bit more expensive and unnecessary if you have some mentorship. There are lots of online resources. There are obviously lots of books and articles and so forth. And some publishers, to their credit, have resources online. I think this is from Elsevier. I'm not advertising for Elsevier here. It's the wrong publisher for us, but they do have some excellent resources on scientific writing, and I think they're pretty high quality. And when you're writing, this is kind of a famous quote from Cicero, which is, brevity is a great charm of eloquence. So, just be very, very brief and to the point. And I always like to put up this superb example of amazing communication. This was a one-pager published in 1953 by Watson and Crick. And this was about the DNA structure, in other words, the basis of life. And the one paragraph that I love is this one at the kind of towards the end of it, which says, it has not escaped our notice that the specific pairing we have postulated immediately suggests a possible copying mechanism for the genetic material. In other words, we're giving you the basis of life. There you go. Just beautiful kind of prose that, that was straight to the point and so succinct. Now, when you come to submit, and I think we will have a session actually on the editor's secrets, that, advice and everything. So I'll spare all of that for that particular session. But there are little tricks that you can use to actually at least get a chance for your story to be heard and assessed, okay? But whatever it is, there is no excuse for not having your best effort at the beginning, okay? So you'll only have one chance to make a first good impression, and if you screw it up, I'm afraid we don't have time to try and figure out and dig for your buried gem in that kind of mess, okay? It's got to be your best shot, and that's why you've got to, you know, really check it in every conceivable way. Get someone who's intelligent but not an expert in your field to read it and give you some criticism about it. Does it make sense? You know, does your introduction actually, you know, excite the reader? You know, do you actually get a take-home message from this? So I think that's a very valuable exercise. The title is also very important because that's just like going shopping. If you're looking at things that, you know, presented well, that's the title, and that's attractive and allows you to kind of want to read that particular article. And the abstract, and I think Nick mentioned that, and Jenny also mentioned that. This is the only part that we read, all right? This is actually the part of the paper. You just read the title and the abstract. If the abstract is rubbish, okay, honestly, it correlates almost 100% with the quality of the paper. And in fact, there have been papers published looking at that in a scientific way. So your abstract is a summary of your work. If it's not really, you know, robust, it means the paper is really not that. And when we get, you know, we all get thousands of papers to review and consider. So put a lot of effort into that one. This is an incredibly important take-home message. I think the abstract, you can't mess around with the abstract. The rest is obviously pretty obvious, and we'll talk about that later. But ultimately, for us as editors, and I'm sure all of you, the editors in the audience, have this. You ask the question, so what? You know, what have we actually gained from that paper if we publish it? What has the world gained from this message? You have to answer that as an author. You've got to actually have an answer for that one when you're telling your story. What is the take-home message that, you know, would excite that journal to publish your work? Now, choosing a journal, again, we'll discuss this in detail in the other session, but there's an art for doing this. And what really breaks my heart is seeing, you know, especially young investigators without any guidance or mentorship who keep submitting, you know, like, you know, 5, 6, 7, you know, articles and get the work rejected repeatedly. This is destructive. This is actually a waste of energy and time. You've got to have a strategy from the beginning as to the hierarchy of journals that you should target. And I think that's something that we can certainly discuss later. The main thing, however, is to be honest and realistic in your expectations. So you've got to learn, and that's where the guidance from the mentorship comes. In other words, this work is not for Nature, okay? Send to this level, pitch at that level. I think that is an important message to convey to people. So this is my kind of summary slide. So emphasizing the importance of education, training, and lifelong learning, mentorship, addressing important questions that people want answers for, designing a good, sound, you know, study, completing it and writing up carefully, targeting the right journal, checking that, you know, what you're sending is appropriate for that journal, and obviously submitting and then responding to the reviewers' comments. And we'll deal with that in other sessions. But ultimately, that will hopefully get you there and get your paper published in high-impact journals. Whatever it is, I think I would like to see those high-impact journals publishing that new trails, things that would actually allow us to make progress a lot faster in alleviating the suffering of humans. And I thank you for your attention.
So thanks, Emad. That was fabulous, and I hope the people watching online and those researchers in the room will take notice of a lot of those points. I've got time for a few quick questions, if there are some, and there are some over here. They're terrific. If we can get the microphone over there, and we'll start off, that will be just great.
Thanks for that great talk. I'm Bronwyn. I work here at HMRI. My question is, how important is the cover letter? Do you guys read it? Because I don't know. I used to not write much. Now I write a lot, and I have no idea if it makes a difference.
Thank you, because you've highlighted a very important point. As simple as it sounds, the cover letter is actually the very first thing that we read, always, because it tells a lot about you, and quite often that's your chance. A good cover letter conveys your excitement, your pitch for why we should be interested in your work. And an excellent cover letter actually goes a long way. Now, there are other things that you can put in your cover letter that would make it, honesty. For example, if your paper has been rejected by another journal, say that actually. And honesty it goes a long way. And if you say that and say, we have addressed all of these things, or we addressed everything except for one thing, we wonder if you might be interested, and actually send the reviews. That works for me. And there have been occasions when, in fact, we've accepted papers straight away because there wasn't any point in having another round of review with 3 excellent reviews and a genuine attempt at addressing that. So the cover letter is incredibly important in a positive direction, but it's also a trap, because sometimes, especially senior authors, they get their paper rejected, and then they immediately, out of rage, they would send it to the next journal with the cover letter exactly the same. So I'm the editor of GUT, and I receive a cover letter to say, "Dear Professor Moayedi," that's an instant rejection, right? Professor Moayedi is the editor of gastroenterology. So in other words, they haven't even bothered changing the introduction to the, that's silly, that's an own goal. And okay, I'm joking about the fact that it's rejected, but the point is that it tells us that this work actually went through a peer assessment and was rejected. So just simple things like this actually matter in the cover letter.
Thanks.
Great advice. There's a question here now, and then we'll come to you, Paul.
Okay, morning everyone. My name is Ayu from Kesmas Journal, Faculty of Public Health on the University of Indonesia. Thank you for the opportunity to ask. Let me see my question I wrote down so I wouldn't forget. An important aspect that when we are reviewing an article is about the novelty. So my question is, for novelty, does the significance of the research need to be at the broader level, like in a regional or global context? Because we often get research manuscripts that are local in scope. Do we need to require the authors whose research that may only be understood at Indonesian context, for example, to provide their novelty in global context to maintain the quote-unquote international reputation? Thank you.
Again, a very, very beautiful question. So it just depends on what you're reporting. If what you're reporting, even though it's actually geographically confined to one region or one country, but it's relevant because it's fundamental. For example, the discovery of Helicobacter was done here in Australia, right? But it's fundamental. It's an infection that affects half the world. So it was relevant. And even though you might say, well, it was a parochial piece of work that was done in a small hospital in a regional whatever, but it still had global impact. So if what you're reporting has global significance, potentially, then yes, we would be interested, even though it comes from a confined geographic area. But generally speaking, if it's something that is a common condition that is well established, and you're describing your own personal experience with it in that particular city or hospital, that obviously has, in the hierarchy of publications, will probably not make it into the top journals, but it's still decent work, and it should have a home in another group of journals. But generally speaking, if it's fundamentally relevant to human health and it's an exciting finding, then everybody would be interested in it. Thanks.
Paul.
Thanks, Emad. Great talk, even though you did slag off gastroenterology covers. One comment I would make is on writing, because you made some superb points, which I totally agree with. But there's one other thing which I think is important to tell people, the younger members of the audience, and that's practice. In that my first paper was really hard, and I wasn't very good. And I'm not brilliant now, but I'm better. And that only came through practice. I think it's important that people don't get despondent that it's hard and it's not that great to start with, because it will get better.
Yes, thanks, Paul. And I can tell you a little anecdote precisely about this, because we all had the same experience. So the very first paper that I drafted, as a junior researcher, I gave to my mentor, actually, is Kenneth McCall, who's a superb writer, and he's a very kind and gentle mentor. And when we met to discuss my draft, he said, "Do you mind if I just change one little aspect of the draft?" And I said, "What?" He said, "The words." So essentially, it was completely rewritten. But that was a very highly educational process because it allowed me to see actually what I've written and then what he scribbled, because in those days, you know, it was before computers, so so it was actually difficult to read that. But we all went through this. We all have to start somewhere and then practice and get better and better and better. And you know, by the time I left that employment, I had written a paper that he didn't actually change anything at all. So that was my greatest success. Yeah.
We'll take one more question, last one, please, because we're well over time now, and we need to have the coffee break, and I'm sure people are desperate for the coffee break. And by the way, the coffee break will be back at 11:15, so we'll have about 15 minutes. So very quick question, very quick answer.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation, excellent one, informative one also. Thanks once again. My question is that preparing the title through a hypothesis, so hypothetically thought, is play in the important role to the high impact genre? Thanks.
So the title actually has two purposes. One is to give a snapshot of what the paper is about, but also because journals worry about titles missing out key words. You know, like when people are searching, so you want those keywords in the title. For example, if it's a double-blind, you know, placebo-controlled trial, you know, all of these things are actually part of search terminology. So to a great extent, your title has got to be cognizant of all of these factors. One is, what is the study about? And two, does the journal benefit from this in terms of the kind of the searchability of that topic? I think these are the kind of the two key aspects. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. Now, before Ginny and Emad go, I need to give you your small gift for your speaking, so I managed to forget to give it to Ginny at the end of this, so she may have it now, and Emad, I'll give that to you. And thank you, everyone. Have a nice break. Please come back in about 15 minutes, and we'll get restarted. Thank you again for your attention. Great job.